welcome. As I mentioned, this is our final session of day one. And in this session, we're going to be closing the loop and making sense of a messy Martech stack. We teased this session a little bit in one of our earlier sessions, so great to be connecting all the dots here. Before we get started, just need to do our regular housekeeping. If you've been to our earlier sessions, you know all this by now. Our sessions are going to be recorded. They're available immediately after we finish the session. We'll also send an email with the links and upload the links to our Launchpad website after the summit. Q&A, make sure you use your Q&A box through Zoom at the bottom of your navigation there. And you can put questions in throughout the session. If they're pretty straightforward, we can answer them. If they're more complex, we'll make sure we answer them at the end of the session. And definitely keep the conversation going using the hashtag CTM Summit 21 on social media. And make sure you follow us at CallTrack and connect with us there. Those are all at the bottom of each of our slides, so you can engage whenever you're ready. As a reminder, separate tickets for each day of the summit. So tomorrow is day 2. We have great sessions set up for you, including a special live recording of our Smart Route podcast at 11 a.m. with Joy Hawkins, where we're going to talk about the good and bad of Google My Business. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you are subscribing to Smart Route Podcast on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify so that you can listen to some of the other great content we've put on there so far. We'll also have our Hidden Gems session where we'll have 2 CTM experts talk about all the tips and tricks you need to know about CTM. And then on Friday at 2 p.m., we will have our Salesforce workshop hosted by Mary, who is also one of our speakers today, where she'll take you through everything you need to know about the integration between Salesforce and CTM. So link has just been shared with you in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you at the remainder of the summit. And also very important to mention, when you attend any session on day 3, you will be entered to win a professional services package valued at $600. So make sure you join us on Friday. All right, so we have an awesome session planned for you today where we're going to cover the problem when it comes to a messy Martech stack, how we attack marketing technology alignment at CTM, and practical next steps for you to put in place today to close the loop on a messy Martech stack. Before we dive in, I wanted to make sure we introduced ourselves. As you may already know, I'm Rebecca Massler. I'm the Senior Manager of Growth Marketing here at CallTrackingMetrics, and I will be your moderator today. Our speakers are 2 awesome members of the CTM team who each own different parts of our tech stack. First, we have Chris Todd, who is our Senior Manager of Demand Generation here at CTM. Chris has spent the better part of his 10-year career as a digital strategist for both agencies and startups. He's a digital marketing generalist with deep experience in inbound and paid acquisition strategies. He spends most of his day telling stories through data and working alongside sales to perfect the buyer's journey. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much.
All right, and as I've already teased for all of you, we also have Mary Keene, who is a Salesforce certified revenue operations leader with over 10 years of experience. She started her career in marketing and promotions before transitioning to CTM, where she is a strategic voice for sales process, reporting, and planning. In between maintaining a robust internal RevOps strategy, she regularly shares her Salesforce expertise directly with customers, as she will be doing on Friday. So welcome, Mary.
Thanks, excited to be here.
All right, so all that being said, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, appreciate the lovely intro. A messy Martech stack. Why did we choose this topic? There are obviously really good tools for sales and marketing. CallTrackingMetrics is a tool for sales and marketing. But I think both Mary and I have seen where once you start adding too many tools, things can go wrong really quickly. Obviously, tools can solve some problems, but at the same time, they start creating others. So the tools, like on their own, don't cause problems, but when sales and marketing teams aren't working in the same tools, things can go wrong and they get really messy really quickly. It's not impossible, and that's what we're here to talk about, is how to get through that and clean everything. So it's not impossible. And before we get started, I just had a quick question for everybody. So if you can, there's a little button on the bottom that says raise hand. If you could just raise your hand if your sales and marketing teams don't work in the same tools. So if you guys are in different tools day to day, please raise your hand so I can get sort of a feel for how you guys are doing. Awesome. I'm definitely seeing some hands come in, which is good because we kind of made the assumption that we weren't alone in this. This is kind of a regular problem where there's not one magic tool that you can just use one thing and all teams are aligned. So it's really nice to see that we're not alone in that. And knowing that we're in different tools, sort of the questions to ask ourselves is, we're in different tools, but is it working well? Or is there a problem? So Mary's going to run through how to tell if there's a problem.
Thanks, Chris. I once heard a really great question that we should all ask ourselves, and it's, do you have an ocean of data and a desert of insights? If so, you might have a Martech mess on your hands. So if you've ever gone to pull a report and it's blank, or you've ever spent a meeting or even multiple meetings trying to figure out whose numbers are the correct numbers, just know that you're not alone, and joining today's session is the first step to take in building and providing better solutions. So these are some of the indicators that there's a problem. Blank reports, legacy processes without documentation, when you put a fix or workaround in place that was supposed to be temporary, but now it's the norm. Integration logs are piling up in the various apps you're using. And all of this is going to result in missing and dirty data. We've seen these within CTM, and they probably look pretty familiar to you.
So believe it or not, at various points, we have seen some of these problems at CTM. We have fixed a lot, and we've put a framework in place to get past some of these things, but we're not perfect yet. And team alignment is actually an ongoing process. So we probably will never be perfect, but we have these frameworks that we have that we put together for our own setup that we're hoping that you can take back to your teams and start cleaning up the messy Martech stack back in your own organizations. So if Mary, maybe you can take us back to where maybe some of our problems started.
Oh, yes. When I joined CallTrackingMetrics in 2014, we were a tiny little business that was above the drive-through for Bank of America. And on the first day, I asked how they were managing their leads. And I was told that we have a spreadsheet and a stack of business cards and just kind of hope for the best. And my reply to that was, we need Salesforce. And making a case for a product like Salesforce wasn't easy. It's a big undertaking and it can get really expensive. At the time, we were only 5 people. It was the founders, an engineer, myself, and one other person, and we were serving as sales and support. So it was hard to kind of make that case. So what we ended up doing was beginning to vet like the different CRM vendors that are out there. Because we were thinking about the future, we ended up going with Salesforce because they made the most sense for us as a growing business. We signed our contract with Salesforce in December 2014, and we officially split sales and support into 2 teams. In 2015, we opened a second adjoining office, and we began to grow from these like teams of 1, which meant that we had to figure out how to distribute the workload. In 2016, we grew the marketing team and we introduced marketing automation to our tech stack. This helped free up so much of our team's time from repetitive tasks, and it allowed us to start becoming more strategic with our efforts and our communication. And then from 2017 to today, we've experienced explosive growth, which brings new teams like customer success, professional services, new revenue streams, new processes, new apps, and with all of that comes many new challenges.
And that brings us to today, where our revenue teams are still split in the day-to-day tools that we use, sales and Salesforce, marketing and HubSpot, and then we both use CallTrackingMetrics. So the process that we have here is leads are captured and nurtured in HubSpot, so that's on the marketing side. There's some scoring, and then when they're sales ready, they go through to Salesforce and CTM. And then we've got data that is flowing between all of these platforms and a bunch of other platforms too. So as we kind of designed this setup that is working really well for us now, we were seeing some roadblocks as we put this together, and we're going to walk through those a little bit right now.
So when Chris and I were reflecting on the last several years, we were thinking about some of the biggest roadblocks because there have been many. So some of the biggest have been lacking internal documentation. That has been a big challenge for us. We're lean and we make changes every day. And when you're in SaaS, the only consistent thing is change. So when you have so many irons in the fire and you finally complete a project, the last thing you want to do is write documentation because you're eager to move on to something new. However, this causes so much headache and it eventually becomes a drain on your time because you're having to constantly clarify processes and expectations amongst the team. Legacy processes, these are things that made sense when our team was small and they stopped making sense as we grew. As an example, when it came to phone calls, we used to take turns answering the phone by saying, "Are you going to take that one?" Because we sat side by side and we were in close proximity to each other, and it worked for us at the time. However, that no longer serves you well when you have commissioned employees and tools like CTM, and especially considering the upward trend in migrating to a hybrid workforce. So as we grew, so did the silos, which ultimately led to a discovery in the lack of alignment in reporting, because everyone was bringing their own numbers, and it's something that I like to call BYOReport. So bring your own report to the table. How do we overcome these roadblocks? So these would be our top 4 recommendations: reference documentation and training, reworking your processes to scale, aligning teams, data controls, and shared goals. And we do have a few secret powers that we're going to talk about toward the end. So first up, we have data controls. I just mentioned bring your own report. This is when you have the famous "my numbers don't match your numbers" conversation. So how do we overcome this and align our reporting? I think a great place to start is to sit down side by side and review the report criteria. Does it match? Are you building reports from the same objects and pulling data from the same fields? Another consideration is if you're working in different apps, it's important to ensure that the data is syncing between both so that both teams have the same data to work with. Something else we've learned over time is that BYOReport is frequently caused by each department needing to slice and dice data the way they need to see it. So that becomes the report that's brought to like cross-functional meetings. And so while it's great that you have reports that are specific to your department's needs, you do need to take a step back and remember that you're a single unit within the larger organization, and employees outside of your department are going to pull these numbers, draw conclusions, and make decisions based off of them. So it's incredibly important to not build key reports within a vacuum and to consider the impact of all parties involved. I'd recommend an agreed upon set of lenses to build and view reports: the lens that's for the company's objectives and goals, the lens that's specific to your team's goals, and so on. The lens that is for the broader organization is what should be referenced in your cross-functional meetings because you're working toward aligning your teams around your company goals. Another thing that I'd recommend is identifying your key fields. I'd look at these by app, by department, by process, and by role. We all have many fields that we work with, and I like to talk about them in 2 groups. We have the foundation, and then we have everything else. So foundation fields are what I like to call the glue that holds our tech stack together. These are the fields that are common amongst all apps that we're using, and it's the bare minimum needed for key processes and communication to be triggered. So when there's an issue with one of our foundation fields, I know that this is a priority 1 issue that needs to be addressed immediately. So what are the everything else fields? This is what helps us to be more strategic. These fields aren't something that we don't necessarily need for processes to be triggered, but they help us to segment or filter customers' reports and show us trends, performance, and opportunities, and so on. So after you've identified your key fields, I'd say take it a step further and add required fields and formatting rules across systems to ensure that data is syncing across all of your systems in the correct format. And then once you've audited your fields, do the team a favor and simplify the end user's UI. This is super helpful because it can help streamline their process. You can start by removing anything that's unnecessary, and then I'd recommend moving your foundation fields to a higher position if you're using a program like Salesforce, because that way everything's front and center. One last recommendation is to make a plan for data retention and restoration. Large volumes of data can result in slower queries, which impacts the end user's experience. The longer it takes for a page to load, the more likely your team will be to move on and skip updating those records. So start by working on a process to archive records at an agreed upon frequency by your teams. In CTM, we do quarterly archives using a set of criteria that both our sales and marketing teams are comfortable with. And so not only does this help speed things up, it could also potentially be a cost savings for you if you're being billed based on your contact quantity. So once you have your data controls in place, the next step is to review and rework your processes. The first step in this would be to inventory everything. Inventory your apps, your objects, your fields, processes, both active and inactive. If it's inactive, chances are it might have worked well for you before. And so why is it inactive? Take a deeper look at it. Also think about, are you over engineering? We've learned here simplification is key. The easier it is to find, understand, and update, the easier it will be to find the breakdowns and fix things. We would also recommend future-proofing your automated processes and reporting too. So think about the goals, initiatives, and overall strategy at all levels. So this role, this department, this company, and then build for the immediate, the next 12 months, the next 24 months, the next 5 years. Future-proof as much as you can without falling down a black hole. An example of this is when you're building processes, don't hard code names or aliases. We went from having a sales team of 1 to having a sales team of Mary and Jason. And fast forward 8 years later, we're now a sales team of like inside and outside sales, BDRs, AEs, enterprise AEs, sales managers, like the list goes on. So you can imagine the pain points with that. So do yourself a favor and define automation by role, not by individual user or hard-coded ID. And I should just mention that it's so fantastic to not have to update every process and report every time we have a new hire. If there's processes that aren't automated or they can't be automated, make sure to make them repeatable, because if it's not repeatable, then it's not scalable. So once you've cleaned up your data and processes, you're done, right? Not without documentation and training.
Yeah, for sure. You just spent all this time cleaning up things, making sure that fields are defined and required and all the processes are in place. If nobody else on your team and in your company knows about that, it's just going to all get crazy in 5 to 10 minutes after you set it all up. So I think we all know documentation and training is very important. The first bullet point here is do it. It sounds a little silly, but you really do have to document and train on these processes and data controls that we just built. It's not something that you can ignore or keep putting off. It's going to make things so much easier as you keep growing and scaling, because these things change all the time. So a good place to start once you do have it documented is make sure it's easy to find, because you don't want to be the only one that can find a file for your team. You certainly don't want to invite more questions your way when you're trying to do these things. So having a shared library is very important. We have tools, a couple different places internally that we can go to share files, Google Drive, Basecamp, whatever you guys are using. Make sure you have an understanding of where to go find these things. Another thing is agree upon naming conventions. In these shared libraries, you're going to have to go searching. You're going to have more than the 4 files that are showing up on the screen right now. You're going to have to be able to search for these things. So make sure it has the context in the title for you to find it later, or a team that doesn't have the context already to be able to find it easily also. Same thing kind of goes for training. This is another thing that you have to keep doing, and it's an ongoing process. You want everybody to be on the same page. Like I said before, things can sort of go off the rails quickly if not everybody is bought in on these processes and changes that you're trying to make between your tech stack. So something that we do internally at CTM is we have weekly quickies where our internal experts just kind of present on a topic so that everybody in the organization can learn. We do things from Google Ads certifications to Salesforce integrations and new features in CTM itself, so that everybody can kind of buy into new things and give their own perspective to those processes, which helps people buy in even more. And of course, this is an ongoing process. The team that exists in our organization and your organization isn't going to be the same today as it is a year from now. So new hires are going to need to be trained. You need to regularly update documentation because the processes are going to change. So just make sure you've got like a regular cadence to keep these things going. And then once sort of all of the data and the tech is talking to each other really nicely, you also need to make sure that the people are talking to each other really nicely. I think one thing that is really common for sales and marketing teams is a lot of finger pointing and butting heads. Instead, we like to high five and have jazz hands. So not to say that marketing and sales have to be best friends, but it's very important to have shared goals and maybe even some service level agreements where everybody's working on the same page towards the same things. At CTM, we're very transparent with our revenue goals, which we work together to back out to MQL goals and opportunity goals and demo goals and all of the things within our funnel. So we're constantly talking and making sure that our numbers are shared. And not just our numbers, but qualitative things too. So like a feedback loop is really important. This can be anything from informal conversations to regularly scheduled meetings across different teams. Things that I do, I meet monthly with Mary just to talk through like sync error logs between HubSpot and Salesforce or Drift or one of our other tools that we're using. I talk with our BDRs monthly just to get that sort of frontline point of view on what our leads are talking about, what our customers are talking about, to make my job better and to help make their job easier. And of course, having shared software within this giant stack of tech that you might have is also very important. At CTM, we of course use CTM. So CallTrackingMetrics is our shared platform across lots of teams, not just sales and marketing. So it's where we can all go and see that one story. All of the context is in one spot. We can go look at it in the same ways, in the same spot, so that we can all get on the same page. So that's another really crucial aspect for us.
So we talked about cleaning up our apps and our processes, but we haven't talked about the most important element of this yet. There's a human involved in all of these interactions, which means empathy is key. So how do you develop empathy? Attend team meetings. I attend various team meetings so that I can understand the day-to-day pain points, struggles, priorities, and the overlap between teams. It constantly has me thinking about like, what can I do to make their job easier? Because if I scratch your back, chances are you'll scratch mine. So fill out your Salesforce records. I would also recommend shadowing each role, a day in the life of your BDR, your AE, and so on. This is going to teach you so much. I sometimes jump in and answer phone calls, which frequently leads me to analyzing everything. So a phone call comes in, what happens? How do they answer? What objects are popping? What information should they be capturing? And is there any friction in the process? Does the workflow envisioned match the workflow executed? And does that jive with reality? If there's an issue, is it a training issue or is it functional? Also involve teams in defining workflows and processes. It's always best to involve the team. That way they're in the loop. They'll contribute great ideas you haven't thought of, and this makes for the best adoption. Because it's presented early, it's a conversation, and then its arrival is expected and more easily implemented. As I said earlier, these are real people in the process, so the relationships we have with them can make or break our success. So trust is critical. Being in the moment with the team can be achieved with regular communication. As an example, regularly reviewing performance data is important because it gives you a sense, or it gives your team a sense of you're in it with them during the quarter, instead of telling them their goals and then how they finished. Additionally, this allows you to identify and resolve issues sooner, which helps to continue to build trust, and you're seen as a true partner in the process. The importance of clean data is then better understood, and it becomes the culture because it ties right back to the commission plans, and we need accurate data for you to get paid. So when the what's in it for me is understood by everyone, it leads to better alignment and better data capture.
And we've got a bonus tip here, because we talked about a lot, and we're not going to pretend to think that anybody can just do this in an 8-hour day. So there are small teams that have a hard time of just fitting anything into their 24-hour days. So tips for small teams, how to prioritize these things that we're talking about. Is this something that must be addressed now? That's a good first question to ask. If yes, obviously you have to do it now. If no, then you can kind of keep asking more questions to dig into, should I do this soon? So does it have overlap with another initiative? This is kind of a kill two birds with one stone. If you can make sales and customer support and marketing happy all with the same task, it's probably worth doing now. And you can also ask yourself, what's the ROI? That happiness of those teams might be that ROI. You don't have to think of ROI as just dollars and cents. I know it's sometimes hard to tie back a dollar amount to some of these tasks. But still ask yourself sort of, what is the outcome? What is the ROI? Who will benefit from this? And will it save time later to do this now? If it's going to make things easier 6 months from now, if you just knock something out right now, get it done, because it's going to open up so much time to do other things that's going to make your team even more successful. And then we also have a double bonus, because also for small teams, an important tip is just ask for help. So obviously, Google is a huge help for these things. When you run into issues like errors and sync issues, you're not the first one. So you can just Google, this thing happened to me in Salesforce, how do I get out of it? Same thing for HubSpot. And you might find somebody else that had a very similar, if not the exact same problem. So that's always a really good spot to start. And then we've got communities, which we think are gold. Mary joins a bunch of Salesforce community meetups, things like Salesforce Admin and Salesforce Women in Tech meetups that meet up local. There's also Slack groups, so of just like-minded folks who meet up. Wizards of Operations is one that Mary is involved in. And there's also just communities within the tools themselves. So HubSpot has like its knowledge-based community where you can upvote topics and try to get new features on the product. We have something very similar at CallTrackingMetrics. We've got a community forum where if you haven't visited yet, make sure you hop in there, see what other people are talking about, and sort of upvote some things that are important to you. It's a way to talk to other users of products, but also get that information known to the product itself. So we'll go in there and see that lots of people want a specific feature, and we can start working on it. We threw a lot at you. Obviously, we can't clean up a whole Martech stack in 30 or so minutes. But I think the important things here are to have a plan. So go through sort of the 4 steps that we kind of outlined, include some of those super secret powers and bonuses, and then work together. Marketing doesn't have to own everything. Sales doesn't have to own everything. Make sure that you're using that empathy to get inside sort of the heads of your other team members, and make sure it's something that's going to work for everybody. And of course, like we just mentioned, ask for help. So if it's not communities, you might have an agency team that you work with that can help you work through these things. Or if it's something tech specific, we've got professional services at CallTrackingMetrics that can help you kind of think through these things as well. So hopefully this has all been really helpful, and you're going to go back to your teams and have it all figured out soon.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We will get you guys a link to the community as well, so you guys can join and start checking that out. So thank you again. This is a great and pretty common topic that's often pretty overwhelming for folks to think about. So it's great to have all these tips and tricks to immediately implement to make things a little bit more manageable. That being said, let's dive into the Q&A. As a reminder, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom. So let's take a look at what's coming through. And I'm going to go ahead and share a link to the community with everyone right now as well. All right, so looking at some questions coming in, let's see. Okay, I think this is a good one for Chris. What are some examples of naming conventions that work well?
Yeah, obviously it'll be very specific to like the file or process that you're trying to get found, but something that's always really helpful is to include like a date. So either it's the last updated date or created date. And then also a department or maybe function can be part of that. So I like to do a descriptive title. So this is a process for defining signups, and then do some sort of a separator where it's then marketing, and then another separator with the date. I think that works really well. And as long as it's agreed upon by sort of all the teams, it's going to be something that you can use. So something that's very descriptive that you can find in search, and then include kind of who owns it or what function, and then a date is always really helpful.
Love that. I am notorious for my personal documents for naming them and then never being able to find them again. So I will have to set up some standard naming conventions for myself.
Yeah, I'll help you.
Thank you. I would love that. All right, so let's see. Another question here for Mary this time. So you mentioned foundation fields. What are some examples of those fields?
Foundation fields are going to be probably different for everyone. For CTM, ours are going to be things like the account name, account ID, agency ID, your account status. Yeah, I mean, it's important to just know, like, is an account active or is it canceled? And so it's important that our foundation fields are carrying through to all systems so that we have like the most up-to-date information when we need it.
Great. All right, this question is one I know that we talk about a lot at CTM, and it's kind of that constant pull between more and less tools. So would it be easier to force teams into fewer tools? Is that kind of what you guys would recommend, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can answer that from my perspective. I don't think there is one tool that you can all sort of agree on that's going to make your lives all that much easier. That would be awesome. I think even if you found a tool that kind of works for both sales and marketing's day-to-day, you're still going to run into the same problems with like your auxiliary tools. So if you're all in the same CRM, you still have maybe a chat tool and an analytics tool and all these other things that still need to talk to each other. So I think coming up with the process and the data control and the things that we kind of ran through are still going to be the biggest things that can make an impact for your company. Just kind of forcing people into a tool usually doesn't end up well, because half of the folks end up being disgruntled and they're not using it the way that you want them to. So while a simple tech stack is nice, it's not always the best option.
Awesome. Okay. And then Mary, one more for you, I think. So you talked about different lenses for reporting. What's an example of that?
Yeah, this is something Chris and I worked on together in the past year. An example that comes to mind is sign-up goals. So CTM has sign-up goals. Our departments have their own sign-up goals. And while both sales and marketing are working toward like a shared sign-up goal, which is the company goal, we both need to view reports differently. So Chris and the marketing team need to view sign-up reports real time so that they can adjust accordingly and make decisions in the moment. So they want to see everything. They want the good, the bad, the ugly, and the ugly, those are just fraudulent accounts. It's nobody in particular. So it's important that we figure out like what channels they're coming through, and marketing can adjust for that. The sales team, they're going to be concerned with different things. Signups are important, but really it's kind of more, we think about them as like a new account because we need to get them through a critical period in the customer journey where the account's most likely to churn. So for that reason, sales is only counting and compensating for signups that make it past that period. So we both need to have like different lenses that we're seeing these through, but it's important that we both have a shared set of reports so that we're both working toward the same goal and are looking at the same numbers.
Yes, avoid too many BYO.
BYOReport.
Okay, looks like there's another question in the chat. Should all teams be involved in the process of evaluating software, or should other teams be brought in later in the decision-making process?
That's a great question. It's something that there's actually an app that we're looking at getting currently, and I thought that it would be relevant to just sales and marketing, and then maybe like the dev teams are going to have to help us implement it. But the more I thought about it, the more I could see just kind of like the across the board, like impact on the organization. So I started talking to each department leader and just kind of figuring out, what's important to you, what keeps you up at night, and just kind of like doing a little digging to find out like what their priorities are. And then from that, it's like, okay, well, here's this great tool I found, and I'd really like you to, help advocate and support this. So I think, bringing in many teams, it's great because you're going to hear the needs in different voices and uncover new things. But it's also important to not have too many cooks in the kitchen. So if you're just trying to bring everybody into it, like if we brought the whole company into the decision-making process for buying a single app, that would be bad. So having some structure for it and kind of like guiding the conversation, I think is the right way to do it.
I agree with that. Very similarly, stay away from too many cooks. I think it's just about what you said, Mary. Identify all the stakeholders really early so you can talk to everybody, make sure your assumptions are checked against their perspective. And then at that point, come up with who needs to be in the room for the next 2-3 months as you're making the choice. So yes, teams need to know about it and have their say, but the way you go about it is making sure that you all know upfront what the goal is, and then get everybody's buy-in, and then have like a decision team that's smaller.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so our last question here. If we only have time to clean up one thing, what would you choose? Anyone have any volunteers?
Yeah, I think solve the people part of it. If that's honestly the only thing that you have time for, teams working together can fight through dirty data if they really have to, as long as you're on the same page and have that empathy that we were talking about. Obviously, like documentation and data controls, all of that is super important, but at the end of the day, like, it has to be the people working together, or it's all going to fall apart anyway. So just, yeah, you got to be on the same team.
Awesome. We had Jacob contribute to the chat here and say, I would choose documentation, which is also fair, but that helps
awesome.
The collaboration between the people. So it all ties together.
I think we found a friend in Jacob.
Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. As a reminder, Mary will be hosting 2 special Salesforce training sessions on Friday. So make sure you sign up for those, and don't forget, when you do, you'll also be entered to win, if you show up, entered to win the professional services package when you join us for our day 3 workshops. So definitely don't miss that, and the chance to see Mary again on Friday. And again, one final thing, we always want to make sure you have a great experience. So please take a moment to scan the QR code on the screen and complete the survey. Have a great day, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and Friday for 2 more days of great call tracking metrics content. Thanks again, Chris and Mary.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for hanging out.
Thanks.